Pat Quinn overcomes a national trend, but still faces a lousy budget situation in Illinois. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, where we talk about state of Illinois politics and how it just might affect your life. And boy, have things been hopping lately. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register, and we're going to review the election. And luckily, I've got some people who follow this stuff very closely and have a little bit of history. I say that because I'm introducing Mike Lawrence first. Mike Lawrence is with us, longtime journalist and former director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute. The resume also includes being spokesman for Governor Jim Edgar in his day. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And Statehouse Bureau Chief for Illinois Radio Network, Melissa Hahn, is with us. She is talking just to us today instead of her 55 radio stations. Welcome back.
Thank you.
And Scott Reeder is here, among the hats he wears, managing editor of Illinois Statehouse News, which has a core of reporters over at the Statehouse. Welcome, Scott.
Great to be here.
Okay, I'm going to do the TV thing here. And as election night happened, we just didn't know who was going to be governor. We had a standoff, as the State Journal-Register said, between Bill Brady and Pat Quinn. As results continued to come in, Bill Brady said we're going to wait for results unless something is changed by the time the show airs. But the election night results, when all added up, had Quinn more than 19,000 votes up out of 3.5 or 3.6 million cast. Where are we, and what does this mean for Illinois, Mike Lawrence?
Well, I think we'll wait a while. I don't know how long. It could be a day or so. It could be a few weeks. I fully understand why Senator Brady is not ready to concede as we do this program. He is down by 19,000 votes, but there could be errors in the reporting from various precincts. There's really no rush for him to concede.
The Quinn administration is still there.
Exactly. If Brady were leading by 19,000 votes, then I think there might be more pressure on Quinn to concede because Brady would have to begin a transition. And it would be very difficult to try to launch a transition when it's uncertain, any degree of uncertainty, whether you're actually going to be the governor.
Right. Now, nationally, there were at least 7 Democratic governorships that went over to Republicans in this phase, but Pat Quinn didn't. How did Pat Quinn, with all of his foibles, survive, Melissa?
I think that's what everyone wants to know. And there are a lot of questions about this. Was it a matter of Democrats really getting those votes out in Cook County, in Chicago, and the Metro East area, because that's the only other county that went that direction? Or was there something about the philosophy? Because Bobby Schilling, who was running against Democrat U.S. Congressman Phil Hare, is very conservative. So he's more like Bill Brady than some of the other candidates. Schilling won, Brady didn't.
Yeah, of course, Schilling is in central Illinois, even though it's a Democratic district, but it isn't Chicago.
The point is that did the people who voted for Schilling and for Mark Kirk, who was running for the U.S. Senate seat, not vote for Bill Brady? Because clearly there must be some difference in how those folks voted, because they voted for a very conservative person in Schilling, they voted for a moderate Republican in Kirk, so where are the missing votes? And we still haven't compared every county, and as Mike pointed out, we don't have the certified numbers anyway yet, but it'll be very interesting to try to backtrack and figure out exactly how that didn't happen.
Scott, analysis?
Well, I mean, one thing that's worth considering, I mean, is Brady did carry every county that Schilling carried. I mean, so he did very well in Central Illinois. He carried Rock Island County, which is almost impossible for a Republican to do, and they used to say it was the most solidly Democratic county in Illinois other than Cook County, and he carried there. He did very well, and I don't think anybody can fault Brady's performance in downstate Illinois. Where he had trouble, I think, is in suburban Chicago. I mean, and I think a lot of that came down to social issues. I think Mike's old boss, Jim Egger, used to say you can win statewide in Illinois and be pro-life. You can win statewide in Illinois and be pro-gun, but you can't be winning statewide in Illinois and be both pro-life and pro-gun.
And Brady did fit that category.
And fit that category. The only exception I can think of to that rule was Fitzgerald a few years ago, and he was running against a very damaged candidate.
Yeah, Peter Fitzgerald when he beat Carol Mosley Braun for U.S. Senate.
But
Yeah.
I think that this was lost for Brady in the suburbs, and probably primarily over some social issues. I mean, because the difference between Kirk's margin and Brady's margins really show up in that area.
You know, it was just about a month before the election that the Chicago Sun-Times, which Mike, you spent a glorious year and a half with them in the middle of other things, but they interviewed Brady at their editorial board, and the lead on their story the next day was, Brady says that school districts in Illinois should be able to teach creationism if they want. He thinks it's a local decision. And as some people have said, you know, this isn't a deep South state. That's not what you expect to hear from politicians in Illinois, and I think that kind of stuff doesn't sell well in Chicago, so I think there was some drop-off from perhaps another natural part of Brady's base on the fiscal side.
Another thing that I wonder now is, you know, Brady kept saying, we don't need a tax increase, we can cut our way out of it. I suspect there are plenty of voters out there who simply don't believe it. A lot of us reporters don't believe it, but I think some of the voters feel that way too. And you know, you think about what possible service you or a family member might need in an economy where 1 out of 10 folks is unemployed. There's a lot more people now who use government services of some sort. I wonder if some of those voters looked at that constant mantra of no tax increase, I can cut us out of this debt.
Yeah, a lot of the
and
numbers
said,
didn't
"There's no
seem
way."
to add up, Mike.
There are single issue voters, but I think a lot of voters, particularly the so-called soccer moms in the suburbs, really look at a package. And if you look at Brady's package, he was pro-life with no exceptions.
Right, and there was
rape or incest.
Yeah, there was a strong commercial from a woman who said, or claimed to be a rape victim, and if Brady were governor, I would have to have that baby. That was very powerful.
Yeah, he had voted against gay rights legislation and then introduced legislation once it had become law to erode it.
Right, and
He was pro-gun, and then to Melissa's point, he's talking about, if I have to cut education, I'm going to do that. If I have to cut social services, I'm going to do that. Now, to resolve the budget situation, it is conceivable that there may have to be some cuts in those areas. But as part of the package that these soccer moms were looking at, I think they came away from that believing he's going to be intolerant. And what you said about the creationism in the schools could fit into that. Now, I think there were some other factors. If you look at Sangamon County, which you do very
Time to
closely along with the rest of the state, he didn't do, Brady did not do as well in Sangamon County as his team thought he would do. And I think AFSCME was a big factor in that.
yeah, well, state workers, well, yeah, they don't like Brady because of the cuts coming, although there were a lot of people who didn't like Quinn very much
Yeah.
because he had imposed furloughs, although that wasn't necessarily the union state workers. But I don't think Quinn was viewed as a great advocate of state workers either, but in comparison to Brady, who kept talking about we're going to cut a dime of every dollar in state government, Quinn would be the better choice
and I think
for job security.
I think what's implicit in what all of us are saying is that Quinn didn't win because people liked him. In fact, his unfavorable ratings were high. He won because a significant number of people looked at Brady in a Republican year and still felt that he was not the alternative to a governor who they didn't think was doing a good
Great
job.
job. Interesting. I do have some numbers just to add perspective. This, I think, is from the Associated Press with 99% of precincts reporting after election night. In Chicago, 505,000 for Quinn, 116,000 for Brady. Big gap there. In the Cook County suburbs, 372,000 for Quinn, 276 for Brady. In the collar counties around there, Brady picked up. That's a traditional, very Republican area, but not overwhelming numbers, 491,000 to 364,000. And downstate, Brady, 815,000, where all of the Brady signs were on along all the highways, and 481,000 for Quinn. So just some perspective there. So we'll see where it goes. It doesn't look, again, in the situation we're in with that 19,000 vote difference, it doesn't look like a recount will happen. That could prolong things, and we could have 1982 all over again when Adlai Stevenson almost had a recount, but Jim Thompson won re-election by 5,074 votes. And I only remember that because Jane Thompson was wearing the button in the blue room at the Statehouse with the 5,074. So let's move on. The legislature in Illinois also resisted the national trend where we saw the U.S. House flip from Democratic to Republican. The Illinois House and the Illinois Senate are both a little bit more Republican, but still in Democratic hands. So House Speaker Michael Madigan will apparently remain in control. We assume his members will vote for him, even though not all of the Democrats running for the House were anxious to say that in their districts, as newspapers, including the Tribune, were bashing Mike Madigan for various things. So what does this mean for the Democratic Party? Can the Democratic Party, assuming Quinn takes office and you still have a Democratic legislature, solve the problems of the state? Okay, Scott, you've solved them.
Well, you know, we've had, I don't see the composition of Springfield changing particularly over the last, from what it's been over the last couple of years. So, I mean, unless something's going to change as far to undo this gridlock that's happened among the different factors in the Democratic Party, I don't see a whole lot changing.
Well, what about, I mean, a key question, of course, is will some sort of tax increase or borrowing plan pass? What about a tax increase? Now that the next election is 2 years away, can Quinn convince his mates on the Democratic side that we have to do at least the 1 percentage point increase in the state income tax, which he calls the surcharge for schools?
I can't, to be perfectly honest with you, if I was Mike Madigan and I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I just got out of this bruising election. I lost, how many seats did he lose in the House?
About, do we think six?
6 seats in the House. Why on earth would I put almost all of my members on a tax increase?
How about to save the state's finances?
But I think if I were him, I would say, this has got to be a bipartisan solution. There's got to be shared political suffering here. And if we can't do that,
You think the Republicans will hold? Because there are downstate Republicans, are there not, Melissa, that would want to vote for
Yes.
a tax increase because they have state facilities and state workers?
Right, but they've been hesitant because their leader, Tom Cross of Oswego, has said, don't do it, let's hold tight.
And he thought he was going to take over
And
the House, too.
yes.
That didn't work.
That didn't work out so well. And I think in the Senate, you will find a similar situation. We talked to Senate President John Cullerton yesterday or the day before, and he was saying that there might be some tougher votes to take. Tougher for him to call because he knows he doesn't have as many votes. He's lost two incumbents. Senator Bond lost, and so did
Deanna
DiMaggio in the
from
49
Carlinville, right.
So he
The end
lost
of the
two people.
DiMaggio
He
reign.
no longer he no longer has that supermajority. So, and even Chris Radogno, the Republican leader, said, you know, they need us more than they needed us before. This is going to be tougher. I can't help but wonder if this next session is going to be rougher than it was.
Mike, as a spokesman for a former Republican governor who once advocated keeping a tax increase in place for the good of the state, what do you think? Will there be backbone to do this? Or not that I'm advocating, but it sure seems like somebody needs some money here.
Well, I think it's too soon to tell. You know, we're going to have to watch things unfold. I think the best solution governmentally is a combination of tax increases and spending curbs. And I think the best way to get to that combination is through bipartisanship. And I understand all the arguments that have been raised at this table, but there will be increasing pressure on all legislators to try to resolve this, and on the governor. And we did not see the kind of leadership out of the governor that is going to facilitate bipartisanship. Perhaps now that he's been through a campaign, been elected in his own right, seen what he can do if he does focus for a few weeks, that may change. The fact that the Republicans now have enough strength in the Senate to stop the Democrats from unilaterally acting when you have a need for an extraordinary vote, I think puts pressure on the Republicans. I really do. Before they could say, hey, you've got the votes over there.
So
you
don't
want
need
to
us.
do it?
Right.
Do it. It's different now, and I've learned through. I'm certainly far from a cockeyed optimist when it comes to the legislature standing up to responsibility, but I would not at all rule out the possibility that Senator Radogno and Senator Cullerton could perhaps get together in the Senate, get something going there, or at least
Like the old structured roll call where...
try to get something going, put pressure on the House, even if they don't take a formal vote in the Senate, to say, hey, we need to do something here. One of the main barriers is the personal enmity between Speaker Madigan and the House Republican leader, Tom Cross, and they've got to get beyond that if we're going to get anything done here. And whether they can get beyond it is another matter, but I wouldn't throw in the towel yet on significant action, and part of the reason I say that is we need it.
Yeah, well, and on that line, how bad is the state budget right now? I mean, the numbers that I've been tossing around that I've heard a lot, we're about a $13 billion deficit outgoing. Comptroller Dan Hahn says maybe up to $15 billion.
Well, it is only
year.
going to get worse because we're not solving anything even in piecemeal. So yes, this deficit is only going to get worse, and Quinn has been talking about what, a $6 to $7 billion, that they did work on it, et cetera, but that's because they're pushing $6 billion into the next fiscal year.
Okay.
This is only getting worse.
Okay, well, we know it's bad. I should note at this point that we do have a somewhat more divided government on the executive level now, because in addition to apparently Governor Quinn winning, and Attorney General Lisa Madigan is back, Jesse White, the Secretary of State, is back, other Democrats. But Dan Rutherford is the new state treasurer, a longtime state senator from Pontiac, Chenoa area. And Judy Bartopinka is back, and she's the comptroller, and she used to be the treasurer, and of course she lost to Rod Blagojevich. And Judy is back with the cup of coffee and
Her fuzzy bear slippers.
Although she used to advertise about being tight with a penny even when she was in the legislature. She was in the Senate, she was in the House, she was kind of watchdoggy. So there were some bumps in the road. Mean much, or just I guess it's part of the Republican trend, and this will just even things out over at the Statehouse.
Well, it is interesting that you have the comptroller and treasurer because those are more the money folks as opposed to, say, Secretary of State and Attorney General, and they would have to agree to some of these major borrowing.
Oh, that's right. They have to sign
plans.
off.
That will be interesting.
Yeah.
Judy Bartopinka did agree with that at least once when Blagojevich,
Right.
she made noises that she didn't like it, but she ended up agreeing to it. So I think that will be interesting. But I wonder if what little ripple effect we got from this Republican wave, that's it.
Yeah,
2 Senate seats, 6 House seats, but 2 constitutional officers.
Yeah.
And those tend to be maybe not as much of a training ground.
A farm team.
A farm
For-
team
for
as the Secretary of State usually is, but You know, and
Yeah.
I don't know
Well,
that Judy
people like-
Barker-Pinka would ever want to run for governor again, but Dan Rutherford, I don't.
He wants to run.
I can't imagine him going a campaign without running
Well,
for
Alan
something,
Dixon was state
so.
treasurer. Adlai Stevenson III was state treasurer. They both went on to be U.S. senators. So.
And I have to tell you a funny, Dan Rutherford just told us this week that on the day after the election, he filled up Ponji, which is his car, which has a Twitter account, I think, and a Facebook page, but he let Ponji have super premium or whatever gas for one day. He was too much of a penny pincher to give it to her twice.
Well,
He filled
we'll
up
see how this
once
goes.
with higher gas.
A real national effect in Illinois, felt in Illinois, of the taking over of the U.S. House was that I guess 4 of our congressional seats have moved from Democratic to Republican hands, including the Bobby Schilling taking over Phil Herron the 17th. Former State Senator Debbie Halverson, who's been in Congress, lost to Adam Kinzinger in the 11th. Bill Foster in the northern suburbs lost to former State Senator Randy Hultgren in the 14th. And Melissa Bean, as we are here, unless the news has changed, is a Democrat who lost to a guy named Joe Walsh, who I believe was kind of a Tea Party-ish Republican candidate that even the Republicans didn't expect to win. So we now have a majority Republican delegation to Congress, and it's been quite a while since that has been. So we're still considered a blue state. We're a Barack Obama state, but things have changed.
Well, I think one interesting element of that has to do with redistricting. If you look over the last several decades, the members of Congress from Illinois, Democrats and Republicans, have gotten together and drawn a new map in the post-census year, which was basically designed to reelect incumbents.
Right. We're talking about the congressional map.
Yeah, the
Because
congressional.
they seem to reach agreement on that easier than the legislative.
Exactly, and the legislature is intended to accept that and rubber stamp it. This could be more contentious this time in Washington. I'm not sure that the incumbents out there are going to be willing to get together as incumbents in the past have done. I think there will be pressure from the party leadership to perhaps not get together. And I don't think there's any guarantee that the General Assembly will accept what they produce. So
Right,
it
'cause
could
it's really
be a different scenario.
Legally, it's the General Assembly with the approval of the governor that sets the congressional map as well. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember
Yeah.
whether the governor needs to be involved. It may be done by resolution,
Okay.
although I'm not sure.
But it is a legislative thing. The
It
Illinois
is.
legislature sets the congressional map, which means Democrats are in charge of this map.
Right.
Which,
Yes.
is not good for all those new Republicans who are hoping to maintain
It
their
could
territory.
be, like I say, it could be a different situation.
Interesting. I would say we've got a few minutes left, but Illinois has now had its own beer summit. because Alexi Giannoulias was invited, who lost the state treasurer, Democrat, friend of Barack Obama, lost that very ugly United States Senate race to Mark Kirk, the congressman with the long military record and a few overstatements. And then in his acceptance speech, Congressman Kirk, or his victory speech, invited Giannoulias to have a beer the next day at the Billy Goat Tavern, which is kind of one floor under Michigan Avenue, downtown Chicago, an old newspaper and political hangout. And they did have a beer, and it made a big event in Chicago. I guess the question is, well, it seemed to work well for Mark Kirk to show that he's made, open arms, and I think it was a good move for Giannoulias and his future to show that he's willing after this to go there in his Chicago Blackhawks cap. Any thoughts on, that race and why the Republican was able to win that one in Illinois when our governor, the Democrat, won?
I can give you, having listened to the speeches from that night, I can tell you this. I thought Alexi was far more magnanimous in loss than Kirk was in victory. I thought Kirk just kept taking whacks at the guy he just got done beating, and it was really kind of sad. I mean, I just thought it was very inappropriate.
Really?
I totally agree with Scott
Is that right?
on that. I heard both of them, and I had precisely that impression.
Yeah. Alexi talked about public service. I know I didn't hear all of Kirk's, but one part that I did hear, which fits that mold, so I wasn't going to judge before I heard, because I was working on a lot of things that night, but he mentioned, I'm Mark Kirk, and I'm taking Roland Burris's old Senate seat. And I thought that was kind of a shot at Burris because that was at an unnecessary time because Burris is not really part of this process.
You know, it should be easier to be magnanimous when you win.
Exactly.
I was frankly disappointed in
Interesting.
Congressman Kirk and how he handled that. As far as the beer summit, I think the people of Illinois ought to pay attention to that. I don't think it'll be long remembered. But these are two guys who savaged each other in television commercials, savaged each other. And yet, Alexei said about, or Kirk said about Alexei, you know, off stage when we were debating, I got to like this guy. Well, the public saw absolutely none of that, which speaks, once again, to the credibility of these commercials.
Which is terrible
Yeah.
because too many people listen to them.
Yeah.
I think we've got about a minute left, but one interesting race in Illinois was usually judges who are getting retained, they need 60% of people who show up at the polls to say, yes, keep this judge. There's a Supreme Court Judge, Thomas Kilbride, in which district is that, the 3rd?
It's the 3rd judicial district, yes.
And because he voted not to allow caps on damages for medical malpractice, there was a whole industry trying to unseat him, but he ended up surviving that with 65% of the vote, right, Scott? So any thoughts on lessons learned?
I think that the public can often see through the malarkey of these ads. There was a very well-funded group that was opposed to Kilbride because he is more supportive of the plaintiff's bar on a lot of cases than they would like. But they made the issue about him on criminal law, which I think is pretty mainstream on, but they tried to distort the record.
Try to make him look like the criminal's friend in these
yes,
ads.
and it was really sad. I mean, I've known Tom Kilbride for 20 years.
Okay.
Great
Well,
guy.
and he did survive, and with that we have to end. So to Mike Lawrence, Melissa Hahn, Scott Reeder, I'm Bernie Schoenberg. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.